For 50 years, people whispered about Linda Gray. They said she gave Barry Gibb an ultimatum so powerful it changed everything. They said she forced him to choose. They said she was the real reason the Bee Gees' story ended up the way it did. But here is the thing nobody talks about. Barry Gibb himself finally confirmed what actually happened. And what he said is so much more surprising than any rumor you have ever heard. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why this woman may be the most important person in one of the greatest stories in music history. Barry Gibb was not born into a calm and peaceful life. He came into the world on September 1st, 1946, on the Isle of Man. And from his very first years, everything around him kept moving, shifting, and changing. His father, Hugh Gibb, was a drummer, so music was already living inside the walls of their home. But it was not a comfortable life. It was restless and uncertain. And that feeling got deep into Barry from a very young age. It gave him something that would follow him for the rest of his life, this quiet fear that everything good could disappear without any warning at all. By the time the family settled in Manchester in 1953, Barry had already learned that nothing stays still for long. And school? He hated it. He and his friends reportedly skipped for nearly a full year. Now, you could look at that and say, well, that is just a boy being difficult. But it actually tells you something much deeper about who Barry Gibb was. He was never meant to sit still. He was never built for rules that felt too small for him. That restless energy, the same energy that made school feel like a prison, would later become the engine that drove some of the most unforgettable music of the 20th century. Because by 1955, Barry had already found the place where that energy belonged. He, along with his brothers Robin and Maurice, formed a group called the Rattlesnakes. They played skiffle-style covers, songs inspired by artists like Cliff Richard and the Everly Brothers. And then, on December 28, 1957, something happened that feels almost impossible when you think about how young they were. They gave their first professional performance. Barry Gibb was still just a boy, standing in front of a paying audience, learning how to hold a room. Most kids that age are still figuring out what they want to be. Barry was already becoming it. Then, in 1958, the whole world shifted again. The Gibb family packed up and moved to Australia, settling in Redcliffe, Queensland, near Brisbane. And this was not some glamorous fresh start. This was hustle and survival. The brothers sang in local venues. They performed at speedway events. One of the most striking images from that time is that they sometimes performed on the back of a truck for crowds who had not even shown up to hear music. Think about that. They were not playing to fans. They were trying to win over strangers who had come for something else entirely. And that right there is where the real Bee Gees were born. Not in a recording studio. Not in front of a crowd that already loved them. But in the hard, unglamorous work of earning attention from people who did not owe them anything. But even as music was giving Barry a direction and a purpose, his personal life was already showing a pattern that would repeat itself. In 1966, while still very young, he married a woman named Maureen Bates. And if you look at the timing, it makes sense. He had spent his whole life moving, unsettled, never quite rooted anywhere. Marriage probably felt like a way to finally pin something down. A way to say, this is mine. This is not going anywhere. But the peace he may have been searching for did not come. The marriage caused real distress for both of them, and before long, they separated. And this is where the story gets interesting. Because what that first failed marriage really reveals is that Barry Gibb was not just chasing fame. He was chasing something stable, something safe, something that would hold. And for a person carrying that much restlessness inside, even love could quickly become complicated. He wanted permanence so badly that he kept reaching for it, and it kept slipping away, until the moment it did not. In 1967, the Bee Gees returned to England with little more than demo tapes and an iron belief in what they could do. Their father had been sending those tapes around for a while. And when a music executive named Robert Stigwood heard the material, he decided to take a chance on them. What happened next was almost unreal. Their song New York Mining Disaster 1941 sounded so close to the Beatles in tone and style that some radio DJs actually believed it was a secret Beatles recording. That mistake gave the Bee Gees immediate, enormous attention. It made them seem bigger than they actually were at that moment. And for a group arriving back in England without much real protection or support, that one lucky break changed everything. The rise stopped feeling slow. It started feeling explosive. And right in the middle of that explosion, Barry Gibb met Linda Gray. They met in 1967 on the set of Top of the Pops. The Bee Gees were climbing fast, and Barry's name was becoming known every single week. And Linda was not some unknown young woman waiting to be discovered. She was Miss Edinburgh. She knew how to stand in front of people. She knew how to carry herself under attention. So when Barry noticed her across the room, he was not just seeing someone beautiful. He was meeting someone who already knew exactly who she was. And that is rare. That is the kind of person who does not need you to make her feel important. And for a man like Barry, who had spent so much of his life searching for something solid, that kind of quiet confidence must have felt like a revelation. Barry later described the moment they saw each other across the room as something that just happened, something immediate and unexplainable. Linda remembered him walking over and simply asking her out for tea. It sounds almost too ordinary for a story this big, and maybe that is why it feels so real. The greatest love stories almost always begin with something small and simple and completely human. But here is one detail from their early relationship that is almost impossible to forget. There is a story that the two of them shared a private moment inside a doctor who TARDIS prop on the set. A future music legend and a beauty queen, hiding inside a television prop like two young people caught up in their own private world, completely unaware of what was coming next. That one little image gives their whole love story a warmth and a playfulness that no Hollywood script could improve on. While Barry's heart was changing, his role inside the Bee Gees was also growing into something massive. He was not just the voice people recognized first. He was the engine behind much of the writing. Reports describe a level of creative output that barely sounds possible, with Barry sometimes producing several major songs in a single afternoon. But behind the polished harmonies and the soft pop image, the reality was brutal. Barry himself later admitted that songs were sometimes written while the group was using amphetamines and alcohol, substances that pushed the pace faster and faster. That confession strips away the elegant surface and shows what was really underneath: pressure, exhaustion, an almost obsessive need to keep producing no matter what it cost. By 1969, that cost was becoming impossible to ignore. The tension between Barry and his brother Robin had grown so intense that Robin stepped away and tried to move forward on his own. From the outside, the group still looked like a success. But inside, the foundation was cracking. And for Barry, the timing made it even more painful, because his first marriage was also ending around the same time. So while fame was rising on one side of his life, his personal world and his family were both under enormous strain. Success was real, but so was collapse. Then Barry made one of the fastest, most certain decisions of his entire life. His divorce from Maureen was finalized in July 1970, and just 6 weeks later, on September 1st, 1970, which was also his 24th birthday, he married Linda Gray. 6 weeks. That timeline almost takes your breath away when you first hear it, because it says everything about how clear his heart already was. This was not a man drifting. This was not confusion. This was a man who had finally found the one thing he had been searching for his entire life, and he was not about to let it wait. Linda stepped away from public life after the wedding. She focused on building a home, raising their 5 children: Stephen, Ashley, Travis, Michael, and Alexandra. And on the surface, that might sound like a quiet, ordinary choice. But it was not ordinary at all. She was a former beauty queen who had stood in front of crowds and knew exactly what attention felt like. She could have kept chasing her own spotlight. Instead, she chose privacy, structure, and calm. In a world that was constantly trying to pull Barry in every direction, she was building the one place that would always pull him back home. Now here is where the rumors come in. For years, people whispered that Linda had given Barry a dramatic ultimatum, that there had been some huge fight behind closed doors. that she had threatened to leave if he did not choose his family over the chaos of fame. Fans built an entire story around that image. A strong woman finally losing her patience and forcing the man she loved to make a choice. But here is what Barry actually said, and it is so much more powerful than the rumor. He never described some dramatic confrontation. He never talked about a night where Linda stood in front of him with tears in her eyes and gave him one last chance. What he said was far simpler and far more devastating. He said he could bring drugs into the house, but they would end up down the toilet. That is it. No shouting. No ultimatum delivered in one emotional moment. Just a quiet, unmovable line that never shifted. Not once. Not ever. Think about what that actually means. Linda did not wait for a disaster and then react. She did not save Barry once and then hope for the best. She acted again and again, day after day, year after year. Every single time the chaos of fame tried to creep through the front door, she pushed it back out. She was not loud about it. She was not dramatic about it. She was just absolutely, completely, impossibly serious about it. And that kind of steady, repeated refusal is so much harder to maintain than one big, dramatic moment. Because one big moment is over quickly. But decades of holding the same line, never moving it, never making an exception, that takes a kind of strength most people never even get close to. Barry himself said it plainly. He once said that he had to deal with his brothers being pretty much out there, but that he was lucky. That word, lucky, is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. Because he was not describing good fortune that fell from the sky. He was describing Linda. She was the luck. She was the difference between the life he got to keep and the life he could have lost. Because the truth is, the world around the Bee Gees was dangerous. The same fame that made them legends also made the worst habits easier to find and harder to escape. Barry saw it happen to his own brothers. He watched the people closest to him get pulled under. Andy Gibb, the youngest brother, died in 1988 at just 30 years old. The official cause was heart inflammation linked to a viral infection. But years of cocaine abuse had already weakened his body so badly that it could not fight back. Barry had been trying to help him. He had been hoping Andy would recover. And then one day, he was standing at a funeral for someone who was supposed to have so much time left. Maurice died in 2003, suddenly and shockingly, during emergency surgery for a twisted intestine at only 53 years old. And then Robin in 2012, after a long and painful battle with colorectal cancer that spread to his liver. Barry was there through Robin's final days. He watched the decline happen slowly, hope appearing and then disappearing, over and over again. When Robin died, Barry became the last surviving BG, the last one standing from the family that had built one of the most successful acts in the history of recorded music. There is a kind of loneliness in that kind of survival that fame cannot touch and money cannot fix. He was still the voice people remembered, but now he was carrying the whole story alone. Through every single one of those losses, Linda was beside him, not just for the public moments that people could see. She was there for the funerals, for the hospital corridors, for the broken, quiet nights that came after. She watched Barry lose almost every person who had shaped his life. And after Robin's death, Barry gave interviews that showed just how deeply shattered he was. And in those interviews, he kept coming back to the same person. He kept coming back to Linda. In 2018, Barry Gibb walked out of Buckingham Palace after being knighted, and he admitted that he nearly fell over. He was overwhelmed. He was not trying to look composed or unaffected. He was just a man who had survived an almost unbelievable amount of joy and loss and success and grief, standing in a moment that felt too big for any one person to hold. And standing beside him was Linda Gray. Their children were there too. Barry dedicated the honor to his brothers, who were no longer alive to share it. And that scene said more than any polished speech ever could. That was not just a moment about music history. That was 50 years of a marriage that outlasted everything. And there was another moment, just a year before, when Barry took the stage at Glastonbury in the Legends slot. He publicly dedicated the performance to Linda. For a man who had spent decades protecting his private world from public attention, that was not a small gesture. It was a declaration. He was telling a massive crowd, and really telling the whole world, that this woman was not a background figure in his story. She was the reason the story was still being told. So what is the real rumor that Barry confirmed? It was never about one night. It was never about one fight. It was about a woman who drew a line on the first day of their marriage and never moved it, not for fame, not for pressure, not for the way the whole world around them was living. She kept drugs out of their home. She kept the chaos at the door. She raised 5 children, while the man she married was one of the most famous people on earth. She never tried to become famous herself. Barry once said that Linda never wanted to be famous. She wanted to be Linda. And that might be the single most important sentence in the whole story. Because here is what that tells you. Their marriage did not turn into a competition between love and celebrity. It did not become a fight over who was getting more attention or whose dreams mattered more. She was not building her own brand off his success. She was not trying to carve out her own spotlight from the one already shining on him. She just wanted to be a wife, a mother, and a person who told the truth even when the truth was hard. And that made her the most powerful force in Barry Gibb's life. Barry and Linda celebrated 55 years of marriage in September 2025. 55 years. In an industry where marriages often do not survive 5. They raised 5 children together and welcomed 7 grandchildren. And they did all of it quietly, without turning their love into a performance for the public to consume. The Bee Gees sold more than 220 million records around the world. Barry Gibb helped write some of the most famous songs ever recorded. He survived the greatest highs and the most crushing lows that music can produce. He outlived all 3 of his brothers. He stood at the top of the world, and he watched the world turn against him. And then he came back. He got his knighthood. He made new music. He kept going. And through every single chapter of that story, the most constant thing in his life was not a chart position or an award or a sold-out arena. It was Linda Gray, making tea, keeping the house, flushing the drugs, and refusing to let the chaos win. That is the rumor Barry confirmed. Not the loud, dramatic version people wanted. The quiet, 50-year version that turned out to be true. The real story is never as simple as one big moment. The real story is always about what someone does every single day when nobody is watching. And that, when you really think about it, is the most powerful love story you have ever heard. If this story moved you the way it moved me, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a video. Because we tell the real stories here. The ones that go deeper than the headlines and closer to the truth. See you in the next one.